Hi guys, it's Rich from Teach Me Music Academy, and today I'm going to be talking to you about the top 5 metal guitar riffs. So metal music, for those of you who don't know, is the kind of music where your grandma would say, it's not music, it's just noise, but it is music. It is super fast, super heavy, and super aggressive form of rock and roll, and it is filled to the brim with shredding guitar solos, crushing breakdowns, highly distorted guitars, drums pumping at super fast BPMs, and plenty more. We're going to be looking at 5 riffs, 5 iconic metal riffs, I hasten to add, and looking about what they're doing. We're going to play them and show you what they're doing, as well as you can hear what they're doing, and then we're going to break it down and talk to you about what it is they're doing, why they're doing it, give you the ins and outs and the rhymes and reasons, and then break it down and show you how you as a player can benefit from these techniques when you are writing music in just the same way. So without further ado, let's have a look at first riff number 1, which is Iron Maiden's The Trooper, and it goes a little bit like this. So let's have a little look at what it is that's going on in this riff. It's a really simple riff based around the scale of E minor, and it just plays a constant descending pattern. All we're doing in this riff is hopping from one note and moving backwards down the scale and then dropping down to a lower note, which is a fourth below the note that we're starting on. I'll show you what I mean. So the first part of the riff, we start on the note of E and we drop down to the note of D, before moving down to the note of B, which is a fourth away from E, which gives us all together this sound like this. We repeat this pattern moving down the fretboard, moving from D to C, and then down to a low note of A, which is a fourth above D. And the final time we move from C to B, and then move down to G, which again is a fourth. So it's this constant descending pattern that gives a kind of familiarity through repetition. That kind of rhythm of ba 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 instantly gets stuck in the listener's head. It grabs them. It's fast, it's frantic, it's repetitive, and it really kind of emphasizes the sound of that riff, and it's really recognizable. I don't think there's a single metal guitarist in this world who wouldn't be able to tell you what Iron Maiden's The Trooper intro riff sounds like. Minor scales are frequently used in metal music because they sound sad. It's as simple as that. It's meant to sound the exact opposite of the generic kind of happy pop music that we're so accustomed to. So when you're writing your own music and in that metal style, why not try utilizing the minor scale? Mess around with ascending and descending patterns and create that familiarity through repetition in your own music. Let's move on to riff number 2. Riff number 2 is a heavy one. It's by a band called Slayer, and it's their song Raining Blood, and we're going to be looking at the intro riff. It goes a little bit like this. So let's have a look at this iconic metal riff. This is something that I describe to a lot of students that I teach as a guitar player's riff. Why do I say that? Well, because theoretically, this riff doesn't work. If we were to look at all the notes in this riff, we'd find a lot of use of chromaticism. Chromaticism means using all 12 chromatic notes of the musical scale that we use in Western music, and it also means using notes that aren't necessarily a part of a designated scale. This riff is all over the place. There are notes from all scales, all chromatic, flying about everywhere. But it's the shapes that we use in this riff that make it sound the way it is. Let's have a look at what I mean with that. The entire riff is based around a really simple pattern. We move from a root note of E to a flattened fifth above, and then the fifth note of E, which is B. So we have this really simple 3-note pattern. And all we're doing is inverted this shape from the root note to the flattened fifth to the fifth, and then changing our finger positions around, so we're doing the exact same shape upside down and the wrong way round. I'll show you what I mean. So we're going from the E to the flattened fifth to the fifth, and then changing those intervals around. So we start here, move the same distance away, but in the other direction now, and then move that position further down the fretboard. In addition to this shape moving up and down the fretboard, it also moves across the fretboard. You'll notice during the third and fourth repetitions of the riff, I played it on higher strings like this. What I'm playing there is the harmony. This means that I'm playing a different set of notes over the top of the riff as it already is. And what it means is we get this really awesome but quite kind of eerie and foreboding sound. I'll show you what I mean by playing both guitars at the same time, and you'll notice the distance between the notes is a fourth. So you'll notice fourths don't necessarily give off a really kind of melodic kind of harmony, but they do sound very full, very thick, and very angry as well. You'll hear fourths in some kind of more unconventional music rather than conventional Western pop music, but fourth harmonies are really good for kind of working with a kind of very eerie and very menacing sound, and they're really easy to do. 9 times out of 10, depending on where you're playing on the neck, you can just move the exact position that you're playing to the next string, and that's a fourth distance because all our strings are tuned to fourths. So this entire riff, as I've said, is just based around a shape that moves around the fretboard and up and down it. This is a perfect example of some guitar players not necessarily doing anything amazing. It's not what they're doing, but how they're doing it. Who would have thought that taking a simple 3-note pattern and moving around in all these different ways would create such an iconic metal riff that sends every single metal guitar player into an absolute frenzy when they hear it? So that's riff number 2. Let's have a look at riff number 3. So riff number 3 is by a band called Judas Priest, and it's their song Painkiller. Here's a little bit about how that riff goes. So to me, this sounds like a metal kind of riff, and it's defined by those intervals on the A string. But what are those intervals, and how does it make this song sound so metal? Let's have a little look behind the theory of it. This song is played in a mode. Now, I'm not going to go into modes in too much detail in this video. I will save that for another video. But a mode is basically a scale, major or minor, played starting not on the root note. That's the simplest way to think about it. So the mode that we're using in this song is called the Locrian mode. As I said, I'm not going to go into too much detail, but the Locrian mode means that we're going to be starting a scale on the 7th degree, the note before it resolves back to the starting note. This song is played in E Locrian, so I'm going to show you what that sounds like now. So this kind of mode is really utilised by a lot of metal guitarists, and that note pattern at the very beginning between the D, E and F notes is a really commonly used kind of metal phrasing that we hear in a lot of old school metal, as well as some newer school bands like Metallica, Megadeth, and even newer bands like Lamb of God. We're jumping just between the E on the A string and the octave down below on the open E string, and just getting that kind of really generic but iconic metal kind of sound. The other 2 notes that kind of give it that little bit of a metal sound is we're jumping to a G note on the lower string and pulling off to an open E, which is kind of a really kind of minor third interval that you hear in a lot of standard minor scales. And we're also throwing in the addition of a B flat, which, considering we're using the E as the root note, has this really kind of dissonant and kind of flattened fifth feel to it, which gives it that kind of very aggressive and kind of angry kind of sound. I'll show you what I mean by jumping between the E note and the B flat. There's something about that interval that to me and to a lot of other metal guitarists just sounds pretty gritty and angry and aggressive. Modes are a really cool thing to use in addition to minor scales. They just add that little bit of edge to songs that the minor scale doesn't quite cut it. So if you're writing riffs and you want to kind of utilize something a bit more aggressive and a bit more minor than a minor sounding scale, then maybe a mode is the scale for you. That's all for riff number 3. Let's have a look at riff number 4. So riff number 4 is a really iconic, probably one of the most iconic metal riffs of all time. It's Master of Puppets by Metallica, and we're going to be looking at the intro riff. This is how it goes. So as I said, it's an iconic metal riff, and once again, there's probably not a metal guitarist out there who doesn't recognize that song and probably doesn't know how to play it. But let's have a little look at what's going on in that riff. It's a really simple descending pattern based around the scale of E minor, but with some chromatic notes thrown in. So we already know that minor scales are great for writing metal riffs because they give us quite a sad sound, and chromaticism just adds that little bit of edge to it by throwing in notes that aren't part of the scale. What else does this riff do that kind of gives it that bit of a metal edge? Well, let's have a look at what the right hand's doing. This riff is defined by those short, sharp, stabbing chords at the very beginning, moving from the E to the D, throwing in that chromatic C sharp, and then C. So obviously the main thing we notice about this riff is those really short, sharp, stabbed chords, which kind of makes it sound almost like a sense of dread building. It creates a bit of suspension, and also they act as like an audible punch in the face. What hits harder than that first chord? As soon as you hear it, bam, you know it's Master of Puppets. Let's also have a little look at what the chords are that are being played. Yes, they're moving around the E minor scale with a couple of chromatic notes thrown in there, but they're also fifth chords. So let's talk a little about fifth chords, or what we commonly know as power chords. Power chords are powerful sounding chords. We take away the third note of a chord, which gives it the tonality of major or minor, and we rely on just the root note, an octave, which is the same note 8 notes up, and the fifth note, which gives the chord the kind of bulky, heavy kind of sound that we associate with metal music. It's a really common kind of technique in a lot of guitar-orientated music to rely on fifth chords, especially in metal music. You'll also find it commonly used in punk because it's quick and easy to play, and kind of you don't lose that high end and all the kind of notes of tonality in the kind of mix when you're playing a lot with a lot of distortion. Finally, let's have a look at the kind of descending note pattern on the lower string and some of the faster notes played on the A string later on. So we move basically in a chromatic fashion from the note of B all the way down to F sharp before hopping back to the A string. Let's just have a little look at that riff. We're utilising a lot of palm muting, which is a technique we use where we mute the strings partially with the ball of our palm on our right hand to create that kind of slightly muffled sound in between each note. And it helps accentuate those notes a little bit more, makes them stand out from everything being the same volume. That really fast, frantic descending riffing again creates a familiarity through repetition, just like we heard in Iron Maiden's The Trooper. It's that kind of fast, frantic note changing that we associate with metal that helps build the tension, especially as we start integrating other instruments into the mix. As that riff's building up in the song, we hear the drums start building up, and we get the feeling that it's about to drop into something even faster, even heavier, and it rightly does. I'm sure if you've listened to the song, you'll know exactly what I mean. So why not try utilising some of these techniques in your songwriting? Utilise palm muting to kind of change the kind of dynamics of your sound when you're playing. Utilise chromatic notes to spice up what you're playing and fill in the gaps in between the notes to get an even more edgier sound. Utilise staccato, short, sharp, stabbed notes to give a real big sense of dread and impending doom and a big build up to certain things that you're building towards in your song. All these techniques help you just sound that little bit more metal. Now finally, let's have a look at riff number 5. So riff number 5 comes from Megadeth, and we're going to be looking at the intro riff to the song Holy War's The Punishment Due. So there seems to be a lot going on in that riff, so let's break it down little by little. This riff is going to be a culmination of everything we've looked at in the previous 4 riffs and more. So let's start with our left hand. So the riff itself, once again, just like Master of Puppets, is based around the minor scale, using E as our kind of root note. And just like Master of Puppets, we're throwing in a shed load of chromatic notes in there as well to fill in the gaps in between the notes. But just for a second, let's take away all the chromatic notes and just leave the notes that are part of E minor to have a listen to the main notes of these riffs. So just like all the riffs that we've heard so far, this is familiarity through repetition. We're creating ascending and descending patterns, alternating between notes in the scale, moving further down the fretboard till we resolve to the final note of E in that big E5 power chord. The chromatic notes in between these notes that we're playing are just kind of there to fill out the space, to make this riff sound a bit more full, and to add even more tension, even more frantic kind of metal style riffing into this riff. Each of these little ascending and descending note patterns are a tone apart. For example, the first two notes are D to E. The second ones are A to B. Then we reverse that and go B to A, and then the fourth note patterns are A to G. And all we're doing is adding in the chromatic note in between those steps. Not always the case, but in this case, definitely a matter of the more notes, the more frantic this riff sounds. You would have seen while I was playing that riff that I moved to higher frets at one point that don't seem to sound part of the same scale, and that's because they're not. All we've done is modulated the riff from one key to another. The advantage of being a guitarist is we can do this a lot of times without realizing, just by taking the shapes that we're playing and moving them up X amount of frets, which is exactly what's happened here. We're taking the exact same ascending and descending scale based around E minor with a couple of chromatic notes thrown in and moving up 2 frets to technically put it in the key of F sharp minor. But we're never quite resolving it because after about 2 bars, we resolve back to the E minor scale and continue back from there, working back towards our ending chord of E5. I'll show you what I mean and I'll point out that modulation just before I play it. And now we change to the F sharp minor. And back to the E minor. Now we've had a look at what the left hand does, let's have a little look at what the right hand's doing in this song. So this riff is super, super fast. Faster than probably all the riffs we've played so far. What makes it sound fast? Well, that'll be the galloping technique that we're using with the right hand. Now, I'm not going to go into this in too much detail. We'll cover that in another video, but it's important to understand the difference between gallops and triplets, which are commonly confused with guitar players. A gallop is a succession of 3 16th notes played super, super quick with a rest of a 16th note at the end. If you played all 4 16th notes, you get this pattern. But if you cut out every 4th note, you get this. Which creates that galloping sound that we hear in many, many metal bands. A triplet, however, is where we cram 3 notes into the exact space where we would have 2 notes. So a riff going about this fast and just playing quaver notes suddenly becomes this. So it's important to remember the difference between triplets and gallops. And what we're doing in this riff is galloping, constantly galloping across these 3 note patterns, ascending and descending down the fretboard. Once again, it adds to that frantic kind of feel with how the left hand's moving, the right hand is just simply complementing that with a technique just as fast and furious. We're also utilizing that palm muting technique that we talked about earlier by resting the ball of our palm just near the bridge of our strings so that we're partially muting the strings. It means the strings don't vibrate as much and the notes sound a little bit muffled, and it just creates a bit of definition in our sound and a bit of dynamics. Not everything's at the same volume, not everything sounds the same, it all sounds a bit different. So as I said, we're utilising a load of different things that we've learned in all 4 riffs beforehand. We're using scales, chromatic notes, we're moving shapes around, we're using palm muting, some frantic riffing, a bit of everything. So it's all these kind of bits that come together and make a metal song sound as metal as it is. As I said in the Slayer song, we can break down this riff all we want into the theoretical parts and think, what was it that compelled them to write this riff as they did? But the chances are, as much as we break it down, Dave Mustaine from Megadeth probably didn't walk into the room and go, hey guys, I've got a really good riff written in E minor. He just played this riff, thought it sounded sick, and then jumped up a few frets and played it again and thought, that sounds sicker, and then finished it off by going back to how he played it before. Because the advantage of being a guitarist is there aren't really any rules for us. We can bend them and we can break them because we can play what we want, because that's the way our instruments are. It's a great instrument to learn and it's super versatile and super, super fun. So take away all these little tips and techniques from these classic iconic metal riffs and apply them to your playing. Utilize the minor scale to get sad and angry sounding songs. Utilize modes for that little bit extra when minor scales don't quite cut it. Utilize fast, frantic techniques like downpicking and galloping and palm muting to make your right hand playing that bit more exciting when you're playing these riffs. And utilize chromaticism, notes that aren't meant to be in the scale but are there anyway. Break the rules a little bit. They're there to be broken. So have fun with it. And if ever you're unsure about how metal your riff sounds, play it to a friend. If they start letting their hair down and headbanging, chances are you're on to a winner. That's it for this video. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like, subscribe and share and follow us on whatever social media platform you're using, Facebook, Instagram and YouTube, just to keep updated with more of our content that will be coming your way real soon. And I'll catch you in the next video.